The initial concerts that we did, we were originally organized specifically to support these rock shows, to give Los Angeles musical performances something equivalent to the ballroom scene in San Francisco. And the bands that we were working with were actually kind of moving on a circuit through various ballrooms. So they would do San Francisco, come down to LA, and then move on to San Diego and wherever else. So the booking company could kind of book them at a single time. So you would come into this hall, which is a very long and deep, large hall with a flat floor for dancing. So it wasn't like sitting in an auditorium. It was very interactive. And in fact, in one of the shows, or two of the shows actually, we had geodesic domes made out of two pewter frames from the hog farm that they were going to be using to take on the road for the carnival that they were putting together. And they were going to hang screens on them and be able to do light shows. So they had just set them up because they were amazing structures. Marshall Buck, who was a student at Caltech, had built some huge strobe lights where she put color gels on, like a magenta gel, a green gel. And those gels would cause the lights to set up and they would alternate. And as they alternated, the domes, if you were inside them, appeared to be rotating and counter-rotating. There was a smaller dome. It was just a framework inside a larger one. So I don't know, it was like a 30-foot dome and a 60-foot or a 20 and a 40, whatever it was. And you walked in, you saw that. Then as you progressed down into the hall, there was a big stage. The bands were playing. Our light show in the later concerts was always on a scaffold in the front. And we had a screen that was 20 feet tall by 70 feet wide back behind the stage. It was a huge screen. And we projected from a scaffolding in order to be close enough. We had two 16-millimeter projectors that used xenon lamps and Mark II projectors. We had a bank of overhead projectors, at least 4, that were using a special ellipsoidal lens and a 1,000-watt lamp. So this ellipsoidal mirror actually was lensing up through the stage and then into the objective and out. And there was no kind of plastic Fresnel lens like you might be familiar with in overhead. So the projections were very sharp and crisp. So we had 4 of those, the 2 film projectors, and then 4 to 6 slide projectors, all projecting onto a single screen. So we were making sort of a kind of, people don't like the term instant cinema, or it kind of means something else, but really we were trying to create a cinematic experience in a live real-time collage. And that was the technique that we had going. So we would work in saturated colors, iconic imagery. The films would be classic films. We would get Kenneth Anger films, Oscar Fischinger films, Francis Thompson's New York, New York, various encyclopedic or educational films on underwater marine life or microphotography, solar eclipses. There was a great film, Dreaming Wild Horses, that we used, and very, very powerful. So those films could be mixed in with the liquids that were being done on the overheads, or the large transparencies, which will also have iconic imagery, symbolic, archetypal imagery. The bands would play basically psychedelic rock and blues. The bands were really all over the spectrum. Cream was one of the bands, so they were doing their kind of psychedelic blues. There were Jeff Beck group. Jeff Beck had just left the Yardbirds as their main guitarist. Sly and the Family Stone would play. And we also had bluesmen like B.B. King and Albert King, James Cotton, along with the Yardbirds themselves played. And at the time, it just went out of my head. The guitar player, it'll come back to me. Jimmy Page. Did I say Jimmy Page before?
No.
No. All right, Jimmy Page was playing guitar with the Yardbirds. Eric Clapton was playing with the Cream. He had been the Yardbirds' first guitar player, at least first guitar player of note. And then Jeff Beck had been their second, so their third was Jimmy Page. And this is before Led Zeppelin. This is 1968. The concerts were intense. The music was very loud, very highly amplified rock music. Extremely well performed, and then the light show was doing the same. And not only did we work with the sort of psychedelic English bands and the blues bands I talked about, there would be the Grateful Dead from San Francisco, the Quicksilver Messenger Service, a range of bands. One of my favorites was Velvet Underground from New York. One of the things we could do was we had enough budget to make new materials for every show, which we did a show every 2 weeks. So we could take a week, create new photographs, find the films we wanted to work with, rehearse in our studio, see how things worked, how you mix them together, how to make them work, and then finding the juxtapositions that were interesting. And from that, we would come up with a set we could do, and we could move through. With each individual band, we could have a very different look, and for every number the band did, we could have change. We weren't interested in doing kind of a constant psychedelic overload wallpaper. We wanted something to be dynamic and change. For the Velvet Underground, we decided to do the whole thing in black and white. So Peter Mays and Jeff Perkins shot some film. I'm sorry, well, it was film, but it was still film, from photographs and books that they took of sarcophagi, various kinds of archetypal imagery, stuff out of alchemy, diagrammatic stuff from alchemy. It was very, very interesting. And that then was projected for the Velvet Underground. And we were using these large shutter wheels that would spin and create a strobing effect. So we call them strobe wheels. And those would allow us to create intense flickers. And we found that between 8 and 15 cycles per second was the most interesting flicker in terms of optical effects and a kind of a feeling you could get, and almost as illusionary 3D. And Brian Geisen had done similar frequencies with his Dream Machine, which is a simpler flicker process. So the Velvet Underground was playing. We were doing the black and white stuff, and in contrast to the bright colors we used for most other acts. And I recall that John Cale was playing with the band still, and they were doing this intense drone music, loud. And the first time I'd ever experienced an actual wall of sound, you know, that thing was a physical presence. And John Cale was droning with the viola, and we were flickering with our imagery, changing. It was very mesmerizing. And the band on cue, you know, Mo Tucker just, boom, one last drum hit, they stopped. They cut everything at once. It was instantaneously no sound. And the light show kept going because we were all kind of, you know, mesmerized by the whole process. And then we suddenly realized, it seemed like seconds went by. We realized, oh, it's over. And then we came down. And then more seconds went by. And then the audience erupted in applause. Everyone had seemed to become hypnotized by this incredible process.